An orphaned boy suddenly appears at the grave of a woman long gone, unraveling a shocking secret buried for years. A cold-hearted billionaire is pulled into a whirlwind of emotions and truths he was never prepared to face. And the past, will it stay buried forever, or return to collect its debt from them all? New York in autumn carried a nostalgic beauty. Golden leaves drifted down with each gentle breeze, scattering across the weathered stone paths of Greenwood Cemetery. Beneath a gray sky, Ethan Carter stepped out of his sleek black Cadillac, his breath mingling with the biting cold air. The luxurious watch on his wrist signaled that today was unlike any other. It marked exactly 5 years since Olivia, the woman he had once loved more than anything, left him forever. Holding a bouquet of white daisies, he walked slowly through the rows of graves, the sound of his polished leather shoes crunching against the gravel. Every year he came here alone, quietly honoring the memory of his late wife. No business partners, no tense calls from the company board, just him and the old memories he could never let go of. But this year something was different. As he approached Olivia's grave, Ethan stopped abruptly. Before the pristine white marble headstone, a child sat huddled, tiny arms wrapped around his knees as if they were the only thing he could cling to. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. His thin jacket offered little protection against New York's piercing cold. His messy brown hair obscured most of his face, but Ethan could still see his large, tear-filled eyes that held a profound sadness far too heavy for his age. Ethan's heart tightened. Who was this boy, and why was he sitting here, right in front of Olivia's grave? "Are you lost?" Ethan asked, his voice low and sharp like a blade. The boy looked up. Those amber eyes, they stole the breath from Ethan's lungs. There was something eerily familiar, too familiar. A strange sensation crept over him, as if he were staring at a piece of his past he didn't even know he'd lost. "No," the boy replied, his voice a faint whisper. "I came to visit my mom." Ethan frowned, a chill of unease crawling up his spine. "Mom?" Before he could ask more, the boy pointed a small finger toward the headstone, where the inscription glowed faintly under the sunset's light. Ethan's world tilted. "Mom?" This boy was saying Olivia was his mother? No. Impossible. Olivia had never been pregnant. Ethan and she had talked about having children, but their busy careers, financial pressures, and endless meetings had perpetually delayed those plans. She'd never mentioned a pregnancy, let alone giving birth. Ethan clenched his fists, his breathing heavy. He wasn't the type to let emotions control him, but in this moment, everything he'd ever believed was shaken to its core. "What's your name?" he asked, his usual confidence wavering. The boy looked at him, his clear eyes searching for something. "Noah." The name stirred no memories for Ethan, but that did nothing to ease his shock. If what the boy said was true, what did it mean? Had Olivia had a child he knew nothing about? "Where do you live?" Noah lowered his head, his small fingers gripping the frayed hem of his pants. "At the Brooklyn orphanage." A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. An orphan? A strange feeling, an inexplicable anger rose within him, not at Noah, not at the small boy in front of him, but at the woman who had left him in the dark. Olivia had hidden this from him. She'd given birth to a child he never knew existed, and then left him in an orphanage as if he'd never mattered. "Why? Have you ever met your mom?" Ethan asked, struggling to stay calm. Noah nodded slightly. "She visited me a couple of times. But then she stopped coming. Miss Joan at the orphanage said she went to heaven." His voice trembled on the last word, and Ethan could feel the pain in every syllable. Olivia had visited her son, but she hadn't told Ethan about him, hadn't brought him home. She'd let Noah grow up alone, without a family. Was this the truth Olivia had left behind? A secret buried until after her death? Ethan's chest felt like it was being crushed. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't let this boy remain an abandoned mystery in his memory. He knelt down, looking straight into Noah's eyes. "Do you want to come with me?" Noah hesitated, his gaze filled with doubt. But then, after a brief pause, he reached out his small hand toward Ethan. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter felt like he was holding something more valuable than money, power, or prestige. A truth waiting to be uncovered, a mystery he couldn't ignore, and, most importantly, a child who needed someone not to abandon him again. The Cadillac glided smoothly through the noisy streets of New York, but inside the car, a heavy silence reigned. Ethan Carter gripped the steering wheel lightly, his eyes occasionally flickering toward the boy sitting beside him. Noah sat huddled in the passenger seat, his small hands clutching the edge of the new coat Ethan had hurriedly bought for him before leaving the cemetery. The boy didn't say much, only gazing out the window at the towering buildings passing by with a distant look in his eyes. A storm still raged within Ethan. Everything had happened too quickly, too unexpectedly. A child appearing at Olivia's grave, calling her his mother, a secret buried for years that he'd never known existed. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to accept the truth without clear evidence. He needed answers. He needed the truth. "We need to see Miss Joan," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Noah glanced up slightly. "Miss Joan?" Ethan nodded. "The woman who took care of you at the Brooklyn orphanage. She knows about your mother, doesn't she?" "No." "How could—" Noah nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with a hint of wariness. "She told me that Mom loved me, but she couldn't keep me." Those words made Ethan tighten his grip on the steering wheel. Olivia had loved her son, yet she'd let him grow up alone. It didn't make sense. Olivia wasn't that kind of person. He needed to know why. Ethan parked the car outside an old, weathered building, its red brick walls faded with time. Under the dim glow of the streetlights, the orphanage seemed strangely still, as if the world inside was detached from the city's relentless pace. Stepping inside, the smell of age hit Ethan. Old paper, rotting wood, and a faint trace of disinfectant lingering in the air. A woman stood behind the reception desk, her demeanor tired but her eyes warm when she saw Noah. "You're back, Noah?" She offered a gentle smile, but when her gaze landed on Ethan, it faltered slightly. "I'm Ethan Carter," he said, placing his business card on the counter. "I need to speak with Miss Joan." The woman paused for a moment before nodding. "Please wait." A short while later, Miss Joan appeared. A woman in her 60s with silver hair neatly tied back and sharp eyes that had seen too many stories of abandoned children. She looked at Noah first, her expression softening, then turned to Ethan with a cautious gaze. "You've come?" she said, her voice laced with understanding. Ethan frowned. "You know me?" Miss Joan nodded. "Olivia spoke of you. She swore she'd never let you find out about this." Her words struck Ethan like a knife to the mind. Olivia had known he had a child, yet she'd deliberately kept it from him. Why? Ethan growled. Miss Jones sighed, pulling a chair over to sit across from him. "Because Olivia was afraid that if you knew, you wouldn't forgive her, because she thought some things were better left hidden." Ethan felt his blood turn cold. "Tell me everything from the beginning." "I want to know it all." Miss Joan fell silent for a moment before retrieving an old file from a drawer and placing it in front of Ethan. He looked down, his heart pounding as he saw the name Olivia Carter written on it. Noah's adoption records. "She gave birth to Noah in secret," Miss Jones said, her voice low. "She never intended to abandon him, but she believed keeping it hidden was the best way to protect her son. And—" she hesitated. "She had a very serious reason for doing so." Ethan looked up, his eyes burning with intensity. "What reason?" Miss Joan met his gaze without flinching. "Olivia didn't just hide the child from you. She hid him from Noah's real father." The room seemed to plunge into a void. Ethan's scalp prickled with numbness. "Real father?" Miss Joan nodded, slowly sliding a piece of paper toward him. It was a copy of an old document, a request for a DNA test that had never been completed. Below Olivia Carter's name, another name appeared. Mark Donovan. Shock surged through Ethan's body. Mark Donovan wasn't a stranger to him. He was a powerful figure in the financial world. Sharp, ruthless and unforgiving of any slight. If Mark Donovan knew he had a son. Ethan shot to his feet, the room spinning around him. This wasn't just a family secret, it was a ticking time bomb. "Does Mark Donovan know about this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with tension. Miss Jones shook her head. "Not yet. But if he finds out, do you think he'd let it go?" "No." Ethan knew with certainty that Mark Donovan would never let it go. A terrifying truth had just been laid bare, a truth Olivia had tried to bury, only for it to resurface now. Ethan turned to look at Noah. The boy sat quietly, not fully grasping what was unfolding, but those eyes still shimmered with a vague fear. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He couldn't turn his back on this. Olivia had kept this secret for too long, but now it was in Ethan's hands, and he knew he'd have to fight to keep Noah safe before Mark Donovan discovered the truth. The New York sky hung gray and heavy as Ethan Carter stepped out of the towering office building where he'd spent the past 3 days piecing together the fragments of the truth. In his hands was a thick file, but what weighed on him wasn't the papers. It was the name written within them. Logan Donovan. A man Ethan had once viewed as a rival now loomed as a potential threat, not just to him, but to Noah. Ethan had heard enough about Logan to know he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Logan Donovan wasn't merely a cold-hearted billionaire. He was a master manipulator, capable of toppling his enemies with a snap of his fingers. A man like that. What would he do if he discovered he'd had a son hidden from him for 7 years? It was a question Ethan didn't want answered, but he had no choice. He had to approach Logan before Logan found out about Noah. The sleek glass doors parted before Ethan, ushering him into Donovan Enterprises, a financial empire where billion-dollar deals were struck like moves in a strategic game. The air inside the building was as frigid as its owner, the echo of footsteps on the marble floor creating a tense rhythm. The receptionist looked up as Ethan approached. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of caution as she studied him. "Mr. Carter, do you have an appointment?" Ethan gave a faint smirk. "I didn't think Logan Donovan was the type to require appointments." The receptionist frowned, but before she could respond, the door to the office behind her swung open. A deep, authoritative voice rang out. "If Carter's come all the way here, let him in." Ethan's heart thudded as he stepped through the doorway. The room was vast, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline. But the breathtaking view faded into insignificance under the piercing gaze of Logan Donovan, the man seated behind an expensive mahogany desk, his expression sharp enough to cut through Ethan's thoughts. Logan didn't speak immediately. He studied Ethan for a moment, as if assessing his worth before deciding whether he merited his time. Finally, he offered a faint smile, one devoid of warmth. "What can I do for you, Carter?" Ethan took a deep breath, suppressing the unease rising within him. This wasn't the time to show weakness. "We need to talk." Logan tilted his head, his gaze razor-sharp. "What's important enough to bring someone like you here unannounced?" Ethan placed the file on the desk. "Family matters." For a fleeting moment, curiosity flashed in Logan's eyes, but he quickly masked it with indifference. He opened the file slowly, scanning the documents inside. Ethan watched him closely, searching for any hint of emotion, any subtle reaction. But Logan was a master of control. His face remained impassive, even as his cold eyes lingered on a single name. Noah Carter. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Logan closed the file, resting his hands on the desk, fingers interlaced. His voice lost its mocking edge. "What do you want, Ethan?" Ethan clenched his fists beneath the table. This was the pivotal moment. He had to steer the conversation in Noah's favor. "First, I want to know if you knew about this." Logan chuckled softly, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. "If I did, do you think I'd have let it slide?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He weighed his words carefully. "Olivia kept this secret for 7 years. he said slowly. She had her reasons. Logan's smile vanished. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city aglow with lights. Olivia, he repeated her name, his voice lowering. I haven't seen her in years, but she was always an enigma. Ethan's jaw tightened. Aren't you curious why she disappeared from your life? Logan turned back, his eyes slicing through the air like a blade. I'm always curious, Carter, but I'm not the kind of man who chases secrets. I let them come to me. The coldness in his tone sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Logan didn't need to seek the truth. It would inevitably fall into his hands. Ethan inhaled deeply. Noah doesn't know anything about you, and I don't think he needs to. Logan raised an eyebrow. You think you get to decide that? Ethan held his gaze firmly. I think I have a responsibility to protect him from what Olivia was running from. A long silence stretched between them. Logan stepped closer, leaning on the desk, face to face with Ethan. Are you afraid of me, Carter? Ethan didn't back down. I'm afraid of what you might do to Noah. Logan tilted his head slightly, as if sizing him up. Then he laughed, a low, cryptic sound. No one's ever said that to me before. Ethan didn't smile. So what are you going to do with this truth? Logan sank back into his chair, a dangerous glint flickering in his eyes. I haven't decided, he said deliberately, but rest assured, Carter, I'm not the kind of man who forgets what belongs to him. A chill coursed down Ethan's spine. The game had officially begun, and he wasn't sure if he could win. Logan Donovan wasn't the type of man to be caught off guard. He'd built an empire through meticulous calculation, always staying one step ahead of his rivals, but this time he'd been blindsided. He sat alone in his office, his eyes fixed on the files spread across his desk. The faint glow of streetlights filtered through the glass windows, casting shadows over his face, sharpening its already icy edges. Noah Carter. The name echoed in his mind like a curse. Logan picked up, the photograph tucked within the file, holding it under the dim light. A boy with deep blue eyes, light brown hair, slightly tousled, and a face more serious than his age should allow. But what held Logan captive was the undeniable resemblance. The boy bore his features. A dangerous wave of emotions surged through him, anger, shock, and worst of all, something he despised, vulnerability. Olivia had hidden this from him. She'd taken his son and erased him from Logan's world for 7 long years. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the storm brewing inside. But the truth stood firm, unyielding. He had a son, and he'd never known of his existence. Logan rose, crossing to the bar cart and pouring himself a glass of whiskey. But when the rim touched his lips, he realized he wasn't in the mood to drink. He'd lost Olivia once before. When she'd left him without explanation, he hadn't chased after her. Logan wasn't the kind of man to pursue anyone. If someone chose to walk out of his life, he let them go. But this was different. This time, Olivia hadn't just left. She'd stolen his son. Why? Was she afraid of him? Did she think he'd be a terrible father? Logan's jaw tightened, his gaze turning frigid. If there was one thing he couldn't tolerate, it was having what was rightfully his taken away. And Noah, whether the boy knew it or not, carried his blood. He had to meet him. He had to reclaim what should have been his. Logan returned to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Bailey, come in. His assistant appeared swiftly, her expression unwavering despite the tension hanging in the air. Contact my legal team, Logan ordered, his voice eerily calm. I want to know all my legal rights regarding a child. Bailey blinked for a split second, but didn't question him. Yes, sir. She left, leaving Logan alone with his thoughts. He didn't know what Olivia had planned, but it didn't matter. She was no longer here to stop him. As for Ethan Carter, he knew the man was trying to keep Noah away from him, but Ethan had no right to decide this. No one did, except Logan. He reached for his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen before pausing on a name. Ethan Carter. He hit call. After a few rings, the line picked up. "Logan," Ethan's voice came through, low and guarded. "I know," Logan said bluntly, skipping any preamble. There was a brief silence on the other end. "Is that so?" Ethan finally responded. "We need to talk, and this time," Logan said slowly, his tone laced with menace, "you don't get to say no." He hung up. A cold smile flickered across his lips. The game had just shifted, and Logan Donovan was never one to lose. Noah Carter had never liked surprises. His life had always revolved around what he could control: fixed routines, familiar paths, people he could trust. But now, everything he'd ever known about himself, about his life, was crumbling. He sat on the couch in Ethan's apartment, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. In front of him, on the wooden table, lay a stack of documents, proof of a truth he wasn't ready to accept. Logan Donovan was his father. He didn't need to look any further. He didn't want to look any further. But the truth remained there, towering, immovable, like a storm poised to sweep away everything he'd ever believed in. Noah lifted his head, his gray-blue eyes blazing with betrayal. "How long have you known?" His voice was so cold even he barely recognized it. Ethan Carter, the man who'd raised him like a son, took a deep breath. He sat down across from Noah, his eyes carrying an unmasked pain. "Long enough to know that keeping this secret was the only way to protect you," Ethan said slowly. Noah let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Protect me? You think hiding me from my real father was protecting me? It's not like that, Noah. Did Mom know?" Noah cut him off, his eyes flashing with desperation. Ethan didn't need to answer. The way he looked down, his hands clenching into fists, it was all the confirmation Noah needed. Noah felt the world spinning around him. His mother had known, and she'd chosen to hide it from him. Why? The question gnawed at his mind, coiling around his breath like a venomous snake. He shot to his feet, shoving the chair back with such force that it nearly tipped over. "I don't believe this." Noah shook his head, stepping back as if the distance between him and Ethan could make it all disappear. "You're lying. Or these documents are wrong. I can't be his son. He's a heartless man, someone who only cares about money and power." Ethan stood as well, his voice carrying a calm that Noah despised in that moment. "I know you don't want to believe it, but Logan Donovan isn't some nobody. He's found you, Noah, and he won't stop." Noah narrowed his eyes. "What does he want?" Ethan fell silent for a few seconds before delivering the truth Noah didn't want to hear. "He wants you." Those two words exploded in Noah's mind like a bomb. "No," Noah snapped almost instantly. "No way. He doesn't know me, he doesn't care, and I don't need him." Ethan sighed, stepping closer, but Noah backed away, his eyes blazing with anger. "My whole life, I've lived without him. I haven't lacked anything. I had Mom, I had you, I had my life." He clenched his fists. "Why is he showing up now? Why does he care now?" "Because he didn't know," Ethan said, his voice heavy with a deep sadness. "Your mom never told him?" Noah opened his mouth to say something, but froze. His mom never told him? He swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to believe she'd had a good reason. But another part, the one screaming inside him, felt betrayed. His mother hadn't thought Logan Donovan was worthy of being his father. But what about him? Did he get a say? The ringing of the phone sliced through his spiraling thoughts. Ethan glanced at the screen, then at Noah. "It's him." Noah felt his chest tighten. Ethan looked at him, waiting. Noah clenched his fists. He didn't want to talk to him. He didn't want anything to do with him, but he also knew running wasn't an option. With a trembling breath, he snatched the phone from Ethan's hand and pressed the answer button. No greeting, no introduction, just a deep, icy voice carrying absolute resolve. "Noah!" Logan Donovan's voice rang out, a cold gust sweeping down his spine. "We need to meet." Noah gripped the phone tightly, his breath catching in his throat. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing on the edge of a truth that could change everything, and he didn't know if he was ready to face it. The air in the room was taut, like a string on the verge of snapping. Noah sat across from Logan Donovan, his hands resting on his knees but clenched so tightly that his nails nearly dug into his skin. Logan observed him, his gaze sharp but no longer carrying the cold detachment of a powerful man. There was something different in his eyes, a hidden depth, a hesitation Noah hadn't expected. Noah had imagined this meeting 100 times in his mind. He thought he'd be furious, that he'd shout and demand to know why Logan hadn't been there when he needed him. He thought he'd hate him, that he'd walk away without looking back. But now, face to face with the man who had indirectly shaped his fate, all those emotions blurred into something indistinct. Logan sighed as if he too didn't know where to begin. "Noah, I don't know what to say to make you believe I'm not the heartless man you think I am." Noah's lips twitched upward, his voice cutting like a blade. "Then don't say anything at all." Logan nodded, but his eyes never left Noah's. "I never had the chance to know you existed. If I had, I would have found you." Noah let out a short, mirthless laugh, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, really? And once you knew, what would you have done? Dragged me into your world, used me as a piece of your empire, or controlled me like another asset?" Logan faltered slightly. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I don't want to control you. I just want to know who you really are. I want to understand you." Noah stared at him. He didn't know whether to believe it. Logan's words sounded sincere, but Noah had heard too many lies before. "It's too late," he said softly. Logan pressed his lips together, his hand on the table tightening slightly. "It's never too late to start over." The room fell into silence. Noah looked out the window, where the city lights stretched endlessly into the night. The world out there kept turning as if nothing had changed, but inside him, everything was upside down. He could stand up, walk away, end this meeting, and go back to living as he had before, as if Logan Donovan had never entered his life. But a part of him wanted to know. Wanted to know if Logan truly regretted it. Wanted to know if, by not turning away right now, there might be a path they could walk together. He swallowed hard and turned back to Logan. "I don't know what to do with this." Logan nodded, his voice warmer than it had ever been. "That's okay. We can figure it out. Together." Noah didn't respond immediately. He just looked at the man before him in silence, wondering if this was the beginning of something new or merely another cycle of the losses he'd already endured. He didn't know the answer, but he was willing to try finding it.